In this exercise video, I'm going to show you how to do a quadruped exercise with a leg extension. Just meaning that you're going to be on hands and knees and you're going to be kicking your leg out behind you in that position. This is great for working on core stability, back strength, glute strength, and coordination. First thing you got to do is get onto your hands and knees. You want to get yourself so your wrists are right underneath your shoulders and your knees are directly underneath your hips here. So you don't want to be super short and narrow like this, but you don't want to be super wide here. You got to get everything stacked on top of each other. Step 2 is to get a neutral spine position. So you don't want your back to be arched like this. You don't want to be rounded like this. You got to find a nice long neutral spine position here. So you want to keep your head in line with your spine as well, making sure that you should be looking down at the floor and not up at the wall in front of you or looking down towards your knees. So you want to be keeping your head in line with your spine. Once you have that spinal position, you want to lightly engage your core by pulling the belly up and in, like your belly button is going up and in towards your spine and slightly towards your head. So once you have that engagement here, you might also focus on a bit of a Kegel as well. So if you've been instructed to perform a Kegel, this is where you want to start with that Kegel engagement with your core engagement. So once you have your posture and your core engagement, now we're going to slowly extend one leg out behind us to extend it in line with our torso as much as possible. And then we're going to bring it back in and alternate sides. Now my head is turned and looking at the camera just so you can see and hear me better, but ideally you want to make sure your head is here as you're doing this exercise, in line with our body throughout the exercise. What you want to do when you're extending this leg back, your big goal here is to keep your pelvis square to the floor and level. So if you're starting to bring one leg back and your pelvis is lifting or dropping, we need to make sure we keep it level. So you should be using your core as well as your opposite glute muscle, your hip muscle, to keep it level. So your goal is to make sure everything stays really stable through your pelvis and spine as you extend that leg back and alternating sides. When you're doing this, again, everything else should be stable. So if you're lifting your leg and your back is arching like this, that's not so good. That means we're not using our core very well. So you got to keep it pretty flat here. Also, if you feel like you're rounding as you lift, that's not ideal either. So you really have to make sure you maintain this neutral position of your back. What you can do to self-monitor if you're having a hard time knowing if you're doing this correctly is you can put like a tissue box or a small empty cup on your back, and if you can do the exercise without that falling off, then you know you're doing it correctly, versus if it falls off, you may need to do some monitoring of your symptoms or of your movements. If you feel like you're not able to fully extend this leg without creating arching or without keeping your pelvis level, what you may need to do is just start with a lift like this. So I'm just extending my leg behind me without lifting quite as high. So you want to make sure you're able to really keep everything stable and isolated through these movements. So if you have to do a smaller lift, that's better than not doing it correctly. The other thing is when you're extending this leg back, think about it being more like you're pushing towards the wall behind you instead of a lift up towards the ceiling. So think about it being like I'm going to try to push something away from me instead of lift towards the ceiling. The more you lift up towards the ceiling, the more you tend to arch your back. And that's not what we want. So really think about extending straight back and pushing something away as you do this exercise.